Hi, good night. Welcome to another edition of Conversation with Rickford Burke. Of course, this is Rickford here in New York. Thanks for joining me. Those of you who are watching from Facebook or YouTube, like or follow me or subscribe to whatever page you're watching at. Take a minute right now and do that. Welcome to another edition of Conversation with Rickford Burke. It's snowing here in New York, just about 27 degrees. And I know it's cold, so one luck those of you who have to go out to work, nurses, police officers, etc., going out to work tonight in New York. Is snowing. So good night to you in Guyana, good night to you in the Caribbean, good morning to you in Europe, Africa, all the rest of the world. Believe it or not, we have viewers all the way from India who watch this show, viewers from various countries in Africa. And I thank those persons. Welcome to Guyanese, especially my two friends in the United States military, one in Germany, one in Japan, who are faithful subscribers to my pages, my social media pages, and viewers of this show. Welcome to you all, everybody. We have a very important show tonight. We're discussing some very important issues of national interest to Guyana. So buckle up, take a minute, call all your friends, neighbors, and send this link to all of your social media contacts. Let them know that the Conversation with Rickford Burke is on. And my guest tonight is AFC leader Nigel Hughes. I'll be back in 60 seconds. Shittling. All right. All right. Welcome back to Conversation with Rickford Burke. Let me give a few shout out. We have some faithful members joining us saying good night to me. Good night, Maureen Mitchell, watching from Illinois. Good night, Peter Alfonso. Peter, where are you watching from? Text me, let me know where you're watching from. I see my good friend from Japan here, faithful member of the United States military. Good night, sir. What's it? Marine. The Marine is in the house. Give us the Marine shout. All right, we have a lot more people watching. This is going kind of fast, so it's difficult. Royal Paris, good night to you, sir. I think Royal might be in Canada. Altia Garaway, good night. Sharon Lar, good night. Watching from, Royal Paris is in Tampa, Florida. Sharon Lar watching from Brooklyn. Good night, everybody. Those of you I didn't get to welcome those on the West Coast of the United States and the East Coast of the United States. Good night. Welcome, everybody. Keep sharing the link, everybody. Share this link. We have a lot of people watching already. And I know this is going to be a highly watched show. Good night. Is it Stanley Wilson? Yes, good night. Thank you. And Gary, good night. Everybody come on, share the link. I'm already getting some questions. So Nigel, all right, you guys take, I want to remember all these questions, so you have to send it back to me. It's going to pass. All right. So with that, let me welcome the man himself, Mr. Nigel Hughes, leader of the AFC. Nigel, good night. Welcome back to Conversation.
Hi, Rickford. Good evening. Thank you again for having me on your program. I think this is the first time I'm on your program for the new year. So happy new year to you and your listeners, even though it's February, a little late in the day, but happy new year.
Thanks. We're happy to have you. I know we'll have a very dynamic and constructive conversation tonight. People are shooting me a lot of questions already. I'm like, listen, I'm the host of this show. Let me ask my questions. But I'm joking. You guys can send me questions. Once I see them, I'll this is an important question. Somebody just asked me. I know Mr. Hughes is getting ready to run for politics. I don't know somebody who run for politics. Actually, mean run for a political office. But how is his health? That's an important question. Good question to start off with.
Interesting. The last checkup, which is last quarter last year, was okay. I mean, I've been backsliding a lot, but so far so good.
That sounds good. That's really good to hear. Keep not backsliding.
I know. I accept full responsibility for that. So absolutely.
All right. So keep sharing the link, everybody. So the first question I wanted to ask is, of recent, we've seen lots of revelations of the massive giveaway of lands. My contact this morning from the Lands and Surveys Department said to me, and I made a post about it, that when the nation realized the extent to which almost all of the lands on the coastal plain and on the Linden-Suicide corridor have been given away by this government to about 10 people, 10 business persons and some private individuals who are supporters of the PPP, the conscience of the nation will be shocked. I know you yourself have been speaking out. I saw an article in the Starwood News today about your concerns. What is your thoughts, or the AFC's thoughts, on this massive land grab by certain members of our society?
Well, Rickford, this is just yet another step in the process of the transfer of state assets to the supporters of the People's Progressive Party. This has been going on consistently since 1992. I think several people have spoken about this. They have brought to the public's attention that transfer, and recently it has become even more apparent. As you know, the people from the back of Mocha were removed from their lands. Those lands are now going at ridiculous rates, $25 million an acre. And that's just the sort of entry price. So clearly what the PPP are doing, and I think it's being accelerated now, they're not quite sure what's going to happen in the next election. So there's this massive transfer of assets, signing of contracts, allocation of lands to, like you said, a very, very small number of people. And it's very, very opaque. A lot of this material is not transparent. We've asked for the disclosure of the names of the people, for example, who have been awarded lands on either side of the Heroes Highway. All that information needs to be made public. We definitely need a right to information. We should have a Freedom of Information Act that obligates ministers and government officials to release information. So yes, that is going on, and it is absolutely outrageous. It's actually offensive at this stage, what has been going on. And this is separate and apart from the contracts, road contracts, etc., that have been awarded. It's a wholesale transfer of assets to less than 5% of the population.
Is the AFC prepared to, if it wins either singularly or in a coalition, reverse all of those transactions, meaning take away those those lands, and distribute them honestly to Guyanese citizens who need lands? And also, are you willing to signal to the international community, to investors, to these persons who are buying up these lands, that they'll be taken away were the government to change?
Right. So I think we should start off in an election year. I think there should be a pause on any sort of major transaction in which state assets are transferred. It's an election year. The tendency is that the political parties in office tend to undertake acts that are not necessarily in the best interest of the country. And so in an election year, I think there should be a pause. Having said that, in relation to your question about what the position of the Alliance for Change would be, I would say, first of all, one would have to conduct an investigation as to the process in which persons acquired land. That's not a witch hunt. That's just a mere audit of the process, if any, that was undertaken in the allocation of lands. Were they, for example, advertised? What was the underlying criteria? How were people identified for the purposes of entering into contracts? Was due diligence done on the acquisition, the funding, where the source of income was? All of that would be part of an audit. If that audit turns up significant irregularities, then we'd have to see what those irregularities are. And at that stage, we would be guided by the results of the audit. What I will say is this: because Guyana is so divided, because Guyana is so ethnically separated, it's very easy to say to a professional of one ethnicity, "Oh, you're biased, therefore you can't conduct an investigation." To avoid all of that, what we have said is that we will hire the best internationally, the best forensic auditing companies internationally, to undertake specific audits in those circumstances. So at least there can be no allegation, or the reputations of the local professionals can be shielded from the, forgive me, the nastiness that tends to occupy that kind of sphere in Guyana.
That was very, very loyally, and you're a skilled lawyer. So let me ask further.
No, sorry. I wasn't attempting to be
loyally.
Loyally. I wasn't attempting to be cute. The reality is you just can't say that we will take away lands. That people have rights. Their rights are given to them by the Constitution. They have rights to due process. And we're not in a kingdom, even though this government behaves as if we're in a kingdom. The king doesn't wake up one morning and says, "Hey, I'm coming to take your land." There's a process.
No, I understand that. Let me ask a further question. How about if 18% of Guyana's lands are occupied, about 18, less than 20%. And none of the two past governments showed any interest in opening up new lands. I mean, this government is going to argue that, oh, we're building the Cynical City. But really, I'm talking about lands deep into past Linden and so on. They haven't opened up new lands. How about if this investigation was conducted, a commission of inquiry, however, whatever format it takes, and it was determined that they went through the legal process to obtain these lands, even though the lands may be undervalued in terms of the cost that they paid for them and so on. How about if they did all of that, but the inquiry determined a situation like South Africa, where 90% of the country's lands on the coastal plain and on that same Linden, Suzite Linden corridor are owned by 1% of the people, meaning 1% of the population owns almost all of the available lands in the country. What would be the policy with regard to those lands that the 1% own?
Well, thanks, Rickford, for the question. The first thing is, if you have a country in which anything over 70% of the land is owned by 5 or 10% of the population, you have a real major problem. The only good thing about that statistic is it tells you exactly what the problem is. And therefore, you have to adopt policies that will address that level of inequity. And you may recall, after the AFC's conference last year when I got elected, one of the first things we said was that the country needs medium and long-term plans for economic development. And one of those plans would include, if we've said the economy, of course, one of those plans would include the distribution of the assets of the country, who owns what, and how you can identify policies that redress the imbalances. That's perhaps a gentle term. The imbalances in the distribution of wealth, the imbalances in the transfer of wealth that have taken place. That obviously has to be redressed. Now, it can't be done instantaneously. That's why you need policies that will redress that. Well, first of all, acknowledge that there is that very, very skewed ownership of land. It will acknowledge the fact if you have 5-10% owning 70% of the land, it means there must be a very large percentage of this population that is either landless or owns such a minuscule amount of land that they cannot use it as an economic asset effectively. So all those things have to be taken into account, and we identify the policies. Now, the Alliance for Change has policies which it is going to propose, but in the interest of the long-term economic stability of the country, in the interest of attracting foreign direct investment, we want to make sure that this enjoys broad consensus. So investors who are coming to the country know that at least, there's some broad parameters which we'll continue to obtain as we go forward, and they feel confident that they could invest.
All right, thanks for that question. Next question. The government has announced that there are about 3 petroleum agreements that are to be signed. In an election year, do you think the government should go ahead and sign those agreements with those companies? And they've refused to disclose the companies in Parliament. Imagine in Parliament. This government is not even they're not even accountable to the Parliament. Should the opposition or the AFC at this point in time, based on our discussion, send a signal to those companies that they should not sign any new contract in this election year because it might be subject to revision? And what is your caution to the government at this point in time, when election is almost here, for them to rush ahead and sign a new agreement, acting like if they're in power forever? What is your advice to those companies with an interest in oil production in Guyana, as well as a government that is so intransigent? They don't believe they should even consult with the Parliament. They should not consult with the opposition. They think that they own the country, they own the oil, they're doing whatever they please.
Right. Well, first of all, Rickford, this is not unprecedented. You will remember in 2015, months before the 2015 election, the then government gave away oil blocks to two particular companies. They were never advertised, and they were given away within 5 to 6 months of the election. And then we discovered that the terms of the arrangements that they had entered into were less than what the market would accept. Now, you would also remember that in the Amalia Falls situation, the key investors, that was during the minority government, did not proceed with the project because they could not guarantee that after the election that the project would enjoy the support. So if the government had signed it without the support of the opposition, it was too high a risk for the investment. To get to your specific question here, I would certainly caution investors in an election year who are especially in oil and gas that they ought to conduct the highest level of due diligence before entering into any contract with the government in an election year. It is particularly high risk. It is not necessarily in the best interest of the government. And then, of course, the question of the arrangements, if they are less than standard, will come into effect. So as an investor, or if I were advising an investor, I would caution against that, particularly with this level of proximity to an election.
Thanks for that question. Sounds that response is modified. We've seen lots of complaints of corruption with regard to the housing ministry, with regard to contracts with the procurement commission, with regard to infrastructure projects. massive corruption. What is the AFC's position with regard to the corruption, and how will the AFC address this issue if it were to go into government?
Well, I thank you for that, Rickford. It is clear that the levels of unusual practices and the conduct of a lot of the tenders is beyond startling. Again, forgive me if I've mentioned this before. There is a block in the Schoonard highway that was recently built, in which there were 26 applicants, bidders, several of them world-class. That's for the international ones. The local ones have been in the industry for decades. They disqualified every single competitor or bidder except this one company. And then that same company, they awarded the contract at $600 million plus over the engineer's estimate. That is, to say that that is unusual would be an understatement. So it is clear from that and other, you've got the Tepui contract, and it's across the board. So it's clear that MPTAB and our bidding process is not working. That has to be a complete overhaul. All the people in there, I think, ought to be removed. And then if they're interested again, they come back in for interviews. The system clearly is not working. So this is not just a question of identifying acts of corruption. It is making sure that we have the institutional arrangements that ensure that we have the best companies qualifying, that the sort of anomalies, well, they're no longer anomalies, they're almost frequent occurrences that have taken place recently are unlikely to occur, that you have a contractor general, for example, who will interrogate these awards, and that the penalties for breaches are so significant that if you undertake a position on that board, it must be at the back of your mind that any sort of infraction will lead to a prosecution with severe penalties if convicted. That is a sine qua non. The second thing is, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We need to just go into the international market, find out what the best procurement processes are, and make sure we retain the people to advise us to establish the most robust system for the consideration and award of contracts. We have to admit that we have a paucity of talent in Guyana. It happens every year at budget. They announce that so much money goes back because our capacity is low. And so that we have to go not only into the diaspora, but into the international community and pay for the quality of talent that would be necessary to establish that kind of procurement system.
The government has been basically running the country alone. Bart Jagdeo, who's the spokesperson for the government, who is the minister of everything, and who's the president and the prime minister and everybody in one, says that...
Just say fourth-term president. Just say fourth-term president.
Yeah, the full-term president. He says that the government doesn't have to consult with the opposition, even though it's required by the Constitution. And they don't believe that the opposition should play a role in the governance of the country. We know that's completely repugnant to our system of government, to the constitutional government. What could be done? Like, for instance, they prepared the budget. They didn't even consult the opposition. There know the certain sector. The only probably committee in Parliament that is functioning is probably the Public Accounts Committee. The Sectorial Committee not functioning. Committee on Foreign Affairs not functioning. They're not
natural resources.
Natural resources not functioning. Not even the Commission. Do you think it's time for us to pressure the government to obey the Constitution? Second, make this requirement an actual provision of the Constitution, meaning in the constitutional reform process. I think you're on the Commission. If the Commission ever gets down to doing work and that report goes to Parliament for action, Do you think this is something now we need to enshrine in the Constitution, that the government must do certain things to include the opposition in the governance of the country, as originally envisioned by the framers of the Constitution?
The short answer to that, Rickford, is yes. And I have been advocating, and we have been advocating for constitutional change. You cannot have a multi-ethnic society like ours, where the winner takes 100% of the power. Let's start at that very basic rudimentary level. That cannot continue. A country which has been consistently divided like Guyana from independence and even before independence, you cannot possibly have a governance system that says, because I win more votes than you, even if I haven't got a majority, I'm entitled to rule the country with all the power. So that's the first problem. So that has to change. Two, you cannot have in a society like this a provision which prevents you from collating after the election. The best thing about election results is that you actually get from the population who they think should govern the country and in the proportions in which they think the country should be governed. So you can't deny the people or the political representatives of the people the opportunity to collate after. The third thing is, if we accept that we are a multi-ethnic country, if we accept that we have been consistently divided, that we have consistently voted on the basis of race and preference, then we should say that, look, especially in a situation where we have several ethnicities, that we must have the broadest possible coalition of forces in government. So what you do there is say that in order for the president to be identified, he must enjoy 60% of the votes in the National Assembly or the Parliament. Because then you know for sure it's not going to be just a particular sector of the society. Then you force all the political parties to have to come to negotiate and agree upon a policy or a series of policies that will bring benefits to several of the ethnicities and all the people in the country. And then you have to agree on a president who will enjoy the support of at least 60% of the people in the National Assembly. So that would be my immediate reaction to that question. In relation to what we can do prior to the next election, but it's evident that the vice president, the president, and the ministers of government have all said that they do not pay heed to what the opposition says, does, or advocates. They've also demonstrated by their conduct that they're not interested. And therefore, they are perhaps attempting to provoke a non-parliamentary confrontation. That is a provocation that I think one ought to avoid. I think the world is clear about what goes on in the country. We've seen it in the transfer of assets. We've seen it in the policies that favor particular supporters of a particular political party. And the question then becomes, especially with this proximity to a national election, what is the course of action that you take? One of them, of course, is to go to court. The problem with the legal system in Guyana is it takes an awfully long time. And again, very unfairly for most of the judges, is that if the judges come from a particular ethnic group, if the decision goes either against that ethnic group, they're accused of betrayal. If it goes in favor, the other side says it's biased. So they're in a particularly difficult position. We also live in a society in which we don't release data. We can't even get the census, the most basic.
We're gonna come to that.
Yeah, I mean, that's basic. That's like ABC kindergarten. We can't even get a census that is now 2.5 years overdue. The census has basic information. This is not complicated. You're trying to calculate futures. Not available. And the government thinks it's okay and it's acceptable. I think what we've discovered is that the only way the government reacts is to international pressure. And persons like yourself, again, allow me to commend you for bringing these matters to the public, the good work that you have done and other people have overseas have done to bring these matters to the fore, and that they have called on their political representatives. We've called in international communities with which Guyana enjoys friendly relations, to see the benefit of what we're saying, but also to bring to bear pressure on the government Because if they don't do these things, we know what the consequences are likely to be.
You mentioned the judicial system. The U.S. country report on Guyana for 2023 outlined what they call corruption in the judiciary. Um, Also, we have a situation where we have a crisis in the judiciary where the Chancellor, Justice Jonathan Cummings, has been acting in that position for 7 years. Same thing with the Chief Justice, Justice Roxanne George, acting in that position for 7 years, although several persons, including the past and current president of the Caribbean Court of Justice, members of the international community, have all called on the government to confirm rather, these women who are acting in those positions to give some stability and independence to the judiciary. Now we have an additional issue where they are refusing to appoint the acting chief magistrate, Faith Magusi. And what is common with all of these women is they're African Guyanese, and we cannot ignore the fact that these women are Afro-Guyanese. What is your view, or what's AFC's views on the fact that, and not only that, the Attorney General is openly demeaning, especially the justices on the Court of Appeal, openly attacking them, openly questioning their motives with regard to their rulings. As he said, he told the cabinet that they would not get any favorable rulings from the Court of Appeal. I'm not sure that you want favorable rulings of government. You want rulings that are compliant with the rule of law and the Constitution, right? So what's the AFC's view with regard to those two issues? The refusal to confirm the Chancellor, Chief Justice, and Chief Magistrate, all Afro-Guyanese women, as well as the Attorney General's persistent attacks on the court.
Well, first of all, I think what's common to the Chancellor, Chief Justice, and Chief Magistrate is that they're all extremely competent. I wouldn't go to their ethnicities. Neither would I go to their sex. I think they're all competent. They all deserve to be confirmed in those positions. So I wouldn't want to say that they should be confirmed because they're female, or they should be confirmed.
No, that's not what I'm suggesting. I'm just saying.
No, but I'm just making it clear because I'm not saying that you said that, but people tend to perhaps think that those are criteria, and they're not. These women are all very, very capable, very competent, and have repeatedly displayed a high level of competence. So that's the basis upon which we say they should be confirmed. The Chancellor should be confirmed, the Chief Justice should be confirmed, and acting Chief Magistrate. The reality is, if you wait in the case of the Chancellor and the Chief Justice for 7 years, you allow people to act in that position. You cannot, with any sort of, well, let me say, acceptability, legal acceptability, say that you now want to move them, where particularly your Attorney General is saying that, or is attacking their judgments on the basis of politics. Because if your Attorney General is attacking it on the basis of politics, then if you want to move them, it could only be for political reasons. And that is precisely the basis upon which we have the separation of powers. That's why you have a judiciary that is separate from the legislature, that is separate from the executive. And if the Attorney General, who is in the executive, attacks the judiciary on the basis that it is questioning its decisions and saying that decisions are political, then the head of the state, the head of the executive says, we don't want to confirm these people. That can only be interpreted as a political decision. Now, for the citizens as well as the investors in Guyana, when you have such a blatant indication of political bias in terms of the determination of persons for specific roles and for confirmation in specific offices, you really have a problem. Because in Guyana, unfortunately, the proximity of politics and ethnic and ethnicity is not particularly distant. So that is most unfortunate. And to have that position adopted where you're publicly saying, look, we're one Guyana, is a problem.
As a follow-up, we're seeing some unethical things happening with regard to the Attorney General of Guyana, and I'm going to be very blunt about what I'm saying. Recently, we saw where the Attorney General wrote the United States government to file a complaint with purely made up lies about myself, Melly Mel. In this country, he possibly would be disbarred because of the lies that he communicated officially in his official capacity as the Attorney General to the Attorney General of the United States. And they're all made up lies. With regard to Melly Mel, we don't know who else. And in all of these cases, he has personal issues and has slandered and maligned the person he's writing the United States government about. If the coalition government were to go into power, would they commission the AFC by itself or in a coalition, would they commission an inquiry to find out the level of dishonesty with which this government has conducted its international affairs and potentially to prosecute anybody who would have, in the name of the people of Guyana, lied to the international community in an attempt to invoke legal or criminal action internationally against people like myself?
Okay, so the first thing I would say, if I'm elected to office, we would have to review the positions and the requests that have been made to foreign governments in relation to various persons. If upon an examination of those actions that have been taken in the name of the state, we find that they have been unorthodox requests and particularly pernicious actions that are born out of perhaps malice or political bias, we will certainly, first of all, indicate to the foreign governments to whom those requests have been made that we would like to withdraw them. That's the first thing. Provided there's enough evidence left in the files, because these things tend to disappear when governments change. Provided there's enough evidence in the file that discloses conduct which indicates an abuse of the powers of the office, the first thing we would have to get is legal advice. We would want to seek both domestic and international legal advice on those activities which might be disclosed by what we find in the file. And based on that advice, if the advice says, we believe that this warrants particular action against the persons who have either abused the office or acted outside of their powers, we would seek we would act on that advice. We certainly would consider that advice and act on the advice. But for me to predict specifically what we would do would depend on what is disclosed and what is available, and of course the qualified legal advice that we would get.
Thanks for that answer. Now, you have met with GCOM, and after a meeting with GCOM, you made a startling disclosure that the commission seemed to be so incompetent that they're not prepared to conduct a free and fair elections in 2025. And also, GCOM has said that they can't implement biometrics because they won't be ready, which speaks to their incompetence. And two, that it requires legislation, which is probably something that they think is so complex. When we've had cases where the government has brought legislation and, bypass all the parliamentary rules and pass it one time. And in this case, they're saying it requires a constitutional reform when the opposition, currently parliamentary opposition, agrees and is calling for that reform. And the commission has adopted a political position which is consistent with the PPP's position. They're not saying, well, biometrics is a good thing, which is something that is used all over the world. The most secure elections are elections in which biometrics are used, right? How can an elections commission say we can't have secure elections, right? And why we can't have secure elections is because it requires a constitutional amendment. That part is not the business of the commission. The commission is to advise and conduct elections. So all the commission has to do is say, okay, we agree that we need biometrics. It enhances the safety of the elections. What is required to enact this is we need the constitution changed. And then the political parties in parliament will have to either vote on the recommendations of the elections commission. Well, they have to vote on it, and then they vote for or against it. But it is not it shouldn't be the responsibility of an elections commission to make such political decisions. So is GCOM a part of the PPP? Did you find that? And do you have confidence in GCOM and the chairman, which seem to be bewitching the politics of the nation right now on behalf of the PPP? I'm sorry, I take that back. Could you answer the question?
You mean with all those assumptions built into it? Yeah. let me start off by saying the way the Electoral Commission is established, it's not an independent body. You have 3 commissioners appointed by the government, 3 commissioners appointed by the opposition, and there's this one single person who sits in the chair. So it's not an electoral or boundary commission like you have in other countries, which is almost entirely staffed by independent people. So that's the first thing. Secondly, it was the most surreal meeting that I've ever attended in my life when we went to that GCOM meeting 2 weeks ago. I hope we've written to GCOM asking them to release the audio-video recording. They can't say that it is confidential because we have no confidences with them. We went to them as a political party. And I would invite you and the members of the public just to listen to that, whatever it is, hour and a half, or extracts of it, and you will realize what happened. So just to give you a snippet of what happened, of the complete and total disarray that takes place there. We had a team of about 7 who attended that meeting, and the entire GCOM was there. Some were online, and they had 2 government commissioners present. On one issue, let's deal with the Asha Kissoon issue. The legal officer, we raised with them that the legal officer had specifically said that Asha Kissoon ought not to have been in Parliament, and that the reason that she was there was an error of GCOM. He said so at a public press conference. One commissioner immediately jumped up and said, I don't agree with that position. That is not the position of the commission. And I have raised several times in this commission the fact that we should publicly say that is not the position of GCOM. Another commission says to him that's incorrect. I agree that the position of the commission is that articulated by the legal officer. And then we asked the chairman, did you take any action, including notifying the Speaker of the National Assembly, that GCOM had made an error and that Asha Kissoon was not supposed to sit in the National Assembly? So she says, I asked my commissioners and they said nothing. They did not give me a mandate. Well, all hell broke loose after that. All hell broke loose. The commissioners literally said she was lying. One, the government one said, that's not so. We had meetings on XYZ. The opposition commissioners came in and said, that is completely an inaccuracy. You had a commission. We had a lot of decisions here. We had lots of discussions here. So here you have the chairman of the commission saying that she got no mandate from her commission, and the commission contradicting her almost unanimously, but for different reasons, that what she said on that point is incorrect. Now, this is the same body that is going to be responsible for managing the election. The second thing that blew me away, or blew all of us away, is we asked about the contract for the CEO. The chair says, I extended it for 3 years. One commissioner says, how do you mean you extended it? When did this happen? You yourself, when I raised it, said it is on the agenda to come up later in the week. And she says, well, I extended it. So he was like, but it's on the agenda to come up. You said that you would bring it to the commission. So here you have the chair of the commission going behind the back of the commission, extending the contract for the most important executive officer for 3 years after she had put it on the agenda to be discussed. Do you
Does
understand the
does she
level?
have the legal authority to do that?
Before we even get to legal authority, Rickford, do you understand the level of subterfuge where the chair says to her commission, it's on the agenda to come up later in the week, and having placed it on the agenda, she goes behind the back of the commission and extends the CEO's contract for 3 years. Now, how can you rely on anything that comes out of a commission where the items are on the agenda and the leader, the chair of that commission, goes behind the commission and acts contrary to matters that have to be discussed upon which a decision is to be made in the future? It is completely, I think if anybody had any doubt about the competency of GCOM to hold credible elections, that recording, whenever it is released, will completely shatter.
Did anyone from the AFC record the meeting, just in case GCOM refuses to release the thing?
I will, like you saying, the Americans plead the fifth. Let
Okay.
me just say that we have evidence that supports everything that we have said. And we have
Would you be willing to, at some point in time, release that evidence?
Well, we have given the commission an opportunity to release it first, because we asked the commission specifically before we left if it was being recorded. It was on Zoom, and the commission said yes. We said, can we get a recording? And they said, Rohi, particularly Commissioner Rohi, said, well, let us discuss it. And we wrote to the commission, it might have been last week, Friday or Thursday, I can't remember which day it was, specifically asking for the release of the audio-visual recording, because then you don't have to rely on what anybody says, you just go straight to the recording. But we want to give them the opportunity to do that. Secondly, on biometrics, Ghana, with a population of 31 million people, 16 million voters, conducted biometric registration in 2.5 months. 2.5 months, 16 million people, biometrics conducted, including fingerprints. The other thing I want to say about biometrics is this. There's a bit of a confusion here. A lot of people are talking about biometrics as a prerequisite, as a condition to voting. That's one aspect of biometrics. And the other aspect is biometrics for the purpose of verifying the integrity of the results. And we're saying if you can't do the first one because it may not be legally permissible at the moment, and I'll come back to that, then the second one ought to be done. So in other words, if Rickford Burke goes to the polling station and they ask for his fingerprints and he gives them, they are received and recorded. If he refuses to give them, that's fine. He can still go to vote if there are other means of identification, visual identification, ID card, what have you. What it means is that when GCOM announces the results, we can say 335 persons gave their fingerprints, and we can verify that they did not vote more than once. There was no multiple voting. The difference between if 400,000 voted, that difference we know did not present biometrics. So at least we have some basis upon which we can begin to examine whatever results GCOM gives. You will remember, and I think it was the 2011 election, that the chief executive officer, Mr. Boudou, was going to declare a seat in favor of the People's Progressive Party, which belonged to the Alliance for Change. Now, all the problems, we said this to GCOM ad nauseum. The problem with every single election from 92 is that it has never been accepted by the party that is supposedly on the losing side. And the reason it's the cause of all those problems have been laid at the doorstep of GCOM employees, not anywhere else. Mr. Mingo, who they love to vilify in the last election, Mr. Mingo was a GCOM employee. He wasn't a PNC representative. He was a GCOM employee. If you go back to the elections before, the problems are with GCOM. They can't seek to absolve themselves by saying, oh, whatever. The only reason people are saying that Mr. Mingo is PNC is because he's black.
Exactly.
He should come out and say that. We believe Mingo is PNC because he's black. Mingo was a GCOM employee.
And I guess you're not implying that Mingo did something wrong. You just
No, I'm not saying
analysis.
Mingo did anything wrong, but I'm saying on their allegations.
Right.
On their allegations. But that's what happens. And we're saying, look, your systems are wrong. So the next question we ask them, have you as an organization conducted any review of the way in which you conducted the 2020 election? You're not going to believe this, Rickford. You're not going to believe this. They didn't try to hide or dodge or say maybe. They said no. And then I said once. The chairman said it, the CEO said it, and they said it more than once. How can you have an election that is so universally controversial and you not even conduct the most basic review of what you did to ensure whether what you did was wrong, identify what you did do that can be done better or can be avoided? Nothing. They themselves say they did nothing. So how are you asking us to accept GCOM as capable of conducting the election in 2025 when the election of 2020, they have not even reviewed their conduct and to see what went wrong, including those 47 boxes of the East Coast. Secondly, we asked them, several of the observers made recommendations, OAS, the EU, the US. Have you considered them and taken any steps? No. Now, this is the same body you want us to have confidence in their capability to run an election in 2025. And the one step that we're saying can actually examine whether or not the results they announce are credible is biometrics. And they're saying, no, you can't have it. So what is the basis upon which anybody is going to accept GCOM's integrity when they announce the results? No biometrics. We know the observers only come in for a week before the elections, when all the skullduggery takes place before. So on what basis are you expecting the citizenry to have confidence in your ability to run the elections where you haven't even done the basics and where you have precluded the one independent step that can speak to whether or not what you have done is correct, which is biometrics?
To me, it's almost embarrassing that Claudia Singh is so incompetent, and she's a former judge. That's just my position. That's a statement, not a question. You don't have to respond to that. I think she's embarrassingly incompetent and dishonest. Now, having said that, or with regard to your meeting and what the conclusion you drew from your interaction with the commissioners, do you think Claudia Singh, not as a person, but as the chairman of GCOM, has any integrity to continue in that position? And does the AFC have any confidence in her to continue that position? Should she resign?
Well, I think the AFC's position on Justice Singh was made very clear before we had the meeting with the commission. I wouldn't want to speak to Justice Singh's integrity. She has served this country long. She's served this country at the highest level, and perhaps she has the benefit of a long period of service. What I will say is that she is incapable of managing that commission, and that under her leadership demonstrated to us in the most pellucid manner that that commission headed by her is incapable, completely and absolutely incapable of managing 2025 elections.
Apart from the word incapable, do you think she's incompetent as the chairman of GCOM? I'm not questioning her service. There's no question that she served long, but the issue of competence in the position she has now.
I just gave you an example. She said she didn't get a mandate from the commission, and all the commissioners almost unanimously said that's impossible. She said she had a discussion. They didn't give her a mandate to go to the speaker, and they all they all said that that is not correct.
They said so she was lying. So she was
Well,
lying.
the language would not be lying. These are people that don't necessarily use that sort of language and avoid that. But I mean, if you say to me, Nigel, we were at the Guyana Football Club yesterday at 4 o'clock, and I say to you in no uncertain terms, Rickford, that is not possible because I was in Barbados yesterday. I think
Then it means that I am lying.
But that's the language you prefer to use. I just gave you the example. I
Okay.
mean, you want to say that you're mendacious? Yes, perhaps.
So you think she's mendacious?
What I'm saying, what I'm saying to you is that she is incapable, demonstrably incapable of managing that commission in any way to be able to deliver a credible result. I don't want to go to integrity. That's where I'll put it.
Having said that, and with regard to all of the deficiencies you discovered with the commission and its inability and the chairman's inability to efficiently manage not only the commission but the elections process, if they were not,
it's not a question of efficiency. That's one of the consequences. Effectively,
okay, right. Now, with regard to all of that and all of your conclusions, were GCOM to go ahead now in its current format with Claudia Singh as the chair and they didn't do anything, they just continue as it is and execute the PPP's mandate to go ahead and prepare and execute elections? Is the AFC willing to participate in an election where the voters list is the same number as the population of the country?
Okay. So the way I can't give you a direct answer as to whether we participate or not at this stage for the following reasons. One, we've started going back to the persons who observed the last election, and we are pointing out to them, we will point out to them, one, GCOM itself has admitted they have not conducted a review. Two, GCOM has not taken on board any of their recommendations. Three, it has been 4.5 years since that event took place. And therefore, in the circumstances, we do not believe that it is possible to avoid the difficulties we had on the last occasion in terms of the acceptance of the results. And therefore, we believe, since you played such a significant role in the last elections, and since you stayed with us for such a long time to ensure that the process came to an end, in order to avoid similar difficulties, or difficulties may not necessarily be similar, but difficulties of a different type of nature, we believe you should say to the government of Guyana that one cannot proceed with the existing voters list, and certainly without biometrics. I think they need to make that position very, very clear. In the case of the United States of America, there is a new administration, and we will seek to engage that administration on those issues. In the case of CARICOM, whose leadership was particularly vocal in the last election.
You say what, CARICOM?
Yes, CARICOM. It's a regional institution, and whatever our views on its efficacy and its participation, etc., they were very vocal in the last occasion, and we will go back to them and say, look, based on what you said, based on what you and your colleagues recommended, we are at this position. We have come to you early. We haven't come to you during the election. We have come to you early, before the announcement of the date of the election. And we are saying to you, here are the problems that we anticipate will happen because we have a problem with the list and because we have a problem with the biometrics. And we always say to you is, look, 4.5 years have passed. You, as a regional body who owes a responsibility to the citizens of the entire Caribbean, have been very derelict in your duty in not checking on the government to see whether or not steps were taken to avoid the same difficulties that caused you to be invited in to attempt to manage and ameliorate what were a difficult position. So we're saying that to you upfront, way in advance. We don't even know the election day. And since you have done nothing for 4.5 years. We're coming back to you to say, this is the state of affairs. And we know that there's a very, very high risk that the same sort of difficulties that led to your intervention in the last time are likely to occur, but not necessarily in the same way.
It's just about 9:03 with 17,000 people watching. Let me ask you, if it's to speculate. I know you're gonna have to speculate, but let me ask you this: if none of those things that you just mentioned, none of those conditions are met, and GCON just steams ahead to implement the PPP's agenda for elections, because that's what Claudia Singh and the commission, the other commissioners are doing, is the AFC prepared to go to elections with all of these deficiencies when we know what the result would be? That we'll have elections that will be challenged, we will have problems again, we'll be going to court, and all of that. Is the AFC prepared to go into elections with GCOM at this status quo?
Well, I'd answer this, and I know you're going to say it's perhaps avoiding the question, but there's so many things. The dynamics are so fluid between now and nomination day that I can't predict now what will happen between now and nomination day. For example, if we uncover significant numbers of Venezuelans who have been issued identification cards and who are on the voters list, who have no historic connection with Guyanese, no parent, no connection with what have you, and those numbers are of such significance that they would impact the results, that's a real issue. That I can't predict to you now how we'd react to that. So there's so many things that can happen between now and then. If I've just given you the example of Ghana, 16 million people biometrics recorded in 2.5 months. If we continue to present evidence like that to the chair of GCOM, who said that she agrees that biometrics are possible. She said that. All she said is that she doesn't believe it can happen within the time before this election. If we demonstrate to her that it is possible to have biometrics, to have that process completed well in advance of the announcement of the date of election, can you please review your position? Well, we'd be very interested to hear what she said, because she hinged her objection to biometrics not on its legality, but on the time frame within which it could be done.
She made the PPP's argument. But
well,
let me ask
the reason why I've tempted to stray away from the PPP's argument, I think it's the principle. In Guyana, we should deal with the principle. And the principle is, you can have biometrics in the time. Whether the PPP are against it or not is secondary to me. The question is, for our country, for our citizens, where we have had problems persistently with elections, we want all the methodologies that will allow us to have confidence in results.
Agreed. Now, let me, this is the point I want to get at. She's the chairman of the Elections Commission. The Constitution gives the Elections Commission power over the president's determination when elections should be called. In other words, if the president says, I want to call elections, and the Elections Commission says, well, we're not ready for the elections, the Elections Commission can change that or advise the president differently. And based on my interpretation of the Constitution, the president has to go with what the Elections Commission says. Now, this is my thing. How can she credibly say it's possible, but the time frame? What time frame? GCOM shouldn't be working with a time frame. GCOM should be working with whatever it's practical to have efficient and free and fair elections. Isn't that true? So if GCOM determines, or GCOM should not consider a time frame when it comes to implementing biometrics, given the history of all the controversies we've had with elections. So if the commission decides, okay, biometrics is the way to go, why in the world are they considering time frame? Shouldn't they consider, okay, let's get the equipment, let's bring in the international experts, let's implement a legal framework, let's recommend to Parliament a legal framework for this, And this is what the commission is recommended. Isn't that the role of the commission?
I certainly agree with you that the commission should have conducted due diligence and found out what the reasonable time is for biometrics, and that's their role. Secondly, one of the things we said to them is cameras in the polling station, not to see how you vote, but to see the number of people that turned up. So if the box at the end of the day has 300 people voting, but the cameras only show 200 people coming in, whatever the result in there, you got a problem.
Right.
And we said, look, cameras are not very difficult to put in all the polling stations throughout the country. I'm sure the international community, not that we lack funds, would be willing to assist in this process. That's another independent means of verifying the integrity of the elections.
Right.
They said, yeah, maybe it's not possible. They haven't discussed. How could you not discuss this? And this was raised a long time ago. But the short answer to your question is, of course, GCOM can and ought to advise the president and the executive about the fact that they can have biometrics. They've checked to see what the time frame is to conduct it, and that it is possible.
And advise the governments. This is the thing. And the other thing is registration. It bothers me the way GCOM functions. To me, it's all about politics. Who has the influence on the chairman is what comes with GCOM. The PPP has, as my position is, the PPP influences Claudette Singh. Now,
Rickford, can I stop you?
Yeah, go ahead.
That's a function of the structure of GCOM. We have the craziest electoral body on the planet. We have an electoral body that says the government has half, the opposition got half.
And the president appoints the chairman, right?
Yeah, I mean, what do you seriously think will come out of a body structured like that? Particularly in a country where we can't even agree on the chancellor and chief justice.
Right.
So the reason I raise that again is for this reason. To then expect anything sounding like an objective position to come out of a body that is structurally flawed is like hoping to squeeze a mango and get orange juice. How are you doing that? It is structurally flawed.
Right.
How are you hoping to get anything close to credible results?
And I'll come back to, if you get into government, what proposals you make to change that. But the point I want to make with regard to GCOM is, for instance, right, I blame President David Granger for us not having, at least at the point in time of the 2020 election, what I consider to be a clean and credible voters list. Now, here why. Claudette Singh used her power. I don't think she has the power, but she used the power.
They went to court, Rickford. They went to court and they stopped the registration process.
But here, this is the point I'm making. The government could pass a bill, right? The President Danger's government could have gone to court and gone to Parliament and passed a bill requiring it. The court can't tell them they can't do that. That's a function of the legislature, right?
Yeah. I'm just wondering whether the amendment to the act would require a larger majority than a simple, but yeah.
No, listen, I just happen to think that the government can go to Parliament, introduce a bill calling for registration. That's not a constitutional thing. I think it's a bill. If the voters list has been compromised, where it has so many, like right now, I cannot understand why GCOM is not embarrassed, because GCOM just said
Say that again slowly, Rickford.
I want to know how come GCOM is not embarrassed.
I want you to process what you have just said.
You mean they're beyond the capacity to be embarrassed?
I just told you what went on in GCOM. How you can ask if GCOM is not embarrassed? The chair was just contradicted by her commissioners, and she wasn't embarrassed. None of them were embarrassed.
But so they put out statistics showing.
Yeah.
They put out statistics showing the country has 718,000 voters. 718,000 voters. Now, whether we want to agree with what our sources in the Stats Bureau is saying, which is that the population has dropped to 712,000 or not, we know the population prior to the 2022 census was below 800,000. We
know the
know we have a
population
school
growth.
population of 250,000, which is below the age of
Okay.
18. How can GCOM credibly put out some nonsense like that?
Okay, so if we go through the censuses, if there's such a term, we know what the population was in 2012.
Right.
We know what it was in 2002, and we know what the trends were for migration. We
Right.
absolutely know what the trends were for migration. So unless there was something drastically different that happened between 2012 and 2022 that either arrested that level of migration or there was some change, we can literally project what's going to happen. And we know that the Minister of Finance in this year's budget speech spoke about 36 per thousand migration rate, something like that. That's in the budget presentation. So if you have those trends and you have that admission by the minister with responsibility for finance, then you can't end up with a population of 800 something thousand. It would mean there would have had to have been a reversal of all those trends, and those trends would mean there'd have to be a reversal of migration and several other things. So I don't see how we ended up with that number.
Now, let's say they decide to go into election. I'm not going to ask you to televise your disclose your strategies, but let's say they decide to go into election with this cockamamie number of 780,000 voters on the voters list, which is a joke. What legal steps can be taken to stop them from using that voters list?
I suppose before we get to legal steps, a fair deal of work would have to be done on scientifically. So you need to have the statisticians to come in and explain in a compelling way why it is not possible. Two, we'd have to conduct a very serious audit on the list of electors to see whether or not it's accurate. And then there's a particularly troubling piece of legislation that they introduced in 2022, which changed residency to address. And what the address means is if Rickford Burke lives at 25 5th Street, Albertown, you don't have to go and check and see if Rickford Burke lives there, You just have to go and see if 25 5th Street, Albertown exists. That's what they changed the law to say. So it's no longer residency. You go and you check to see whether
the address exists,
lives at that address. It's just whether the address exists.
It goes to their intent.
Of course,
that's their intent. They don't want to verify the people
are right now. But that's one of the changes that took place. So what happens if you live in a community that doesn't have lot numbers? What happens if you live in Philippi or you live in Chinawing? And you got no lot numbers. So
but that's the intent. The intent is that you can verify the people that they create on the voters list.
Rickford Burke puts down his address as Chinawing. You didn't even need to travel to Chinawing because Chinawing exists.
It's on the map. Exactly.
It's on the map. There we go. That's where we are, my friend.
All right. Let's move. We have 15 minutes more. Let's move on. We have an assistant commissioner of police under investigation for alleged money laundering and some other financial crimes. Without speaking to the innocent or guilt of Mr. Calvin Brutus, what we saw unfold is a set of abuses, and I think you referred to one today, where they have him charged. He's currently in the magistrate court. At the same time, the Police Service Commission, which is not fully constituted, appointed a tribunal. And the tribunal chairman is one of the persons who defended the government in the lawsuits that the civil suits that Mr. Brutus brought. So she would have had all the discovery. She would have had Mr. Brutus's defense. She would have had the government's evidence that they proffered. in defense of their being challenged in court by Mr. Brutus, all of that. And I think fundamental fairness dictates that somebody like that should not turn around and investigate Mr. Brutus. Then you have an attorney who offered to defend him. He didn't retain him, and then he is now on the counsel to the commission and all of that. Don't you think that this whole issue now has been turned on its head, and the government's abuse of its authority now turns out to be where Mr. Brutus's fundamental rights to natural justice have been violated or could be violated?
Well, I think Mr. Brutus has actually initiated legal proceedings alleging that those rights have been violated, and it would be inappropriate for me to comment on them. What I would say is that this entire affair has been so poorly handled by the law enforcement agencies, and the manner in which they seem to be pursuing Mr. Brutus suggests that this is a little bit more than a prosecution of a criminal allegation, but this has been escalated to some sort of intent to really
destroy,
persecute him. But I want to be very careful because there's so many legal actions taking place. In relation to the two examples you gave, in relation to one lawyer offering his service, if all he did is offer his service and there was no discussion or no exchange of information or instructions passed, then I don't think there's the issue of privilege arises. So if I call you up and say, Rickford, hey, I am willing to defend you, and you say, hey, Nigel, hey, sorry, I got a team, you haven't shared any information with me, so quote unquote privilege. That's a completely different thing from ethical conduct. Having called you up and you've rejected me, but I could run to the other side. That may be permissible, but it's ethically challenged. In relation to the other attorney who advised the Attorney General in active legal proceedings in which Mr. Brutus had taken the state to court, I think that person is in a more difficult position because clearly the state would have briefed that person and shared with that person information which would have caused that person to perhaps even give a legal opinion, which means that person has already arrived at a legal position in relation to Mr. Brutus. And therefore, having arrived at the position in relation to Mr. Brutus in terms of an opinion, and particularly where that opinion was followed with litigation, it means that opinion probably recommended litigation. Or so a person who would have arrived at an opinion and offered that opinion and documented it ought not then to sit in judgment of the person for whom they have already arrived at a position. And I'm not saying that they're incapable of disabusing their minds. It just ought not to be there. It's the appearance of justice.
Exactly. How about the fact that he's currently in criminal proceedings, which are sub judice before the magistrate court, and simultaneously they're conducting this this tribunal at which they're compelling him to testify. Now, let's say he complies with that, and he goes and he gives testimony in that tribunal, which they can then turn around and use against him at the criminal trial. Does that place his rights in jeopardy?
Well, there are a couple of things there that I'm uncomfortable with. And one of them is that I'm not sure that a tribunal can compel you to give evidence in violation of your right to silence, guaranteed under 144. So I'm not sure that any commissioner that is established can actually cause you to have to surrender your protected constitutional right under 144. So I'm dubious as to whether a commission can actually compel him to give evidence. The second point is this: you can't conduct proceedings with the hope of arriving at a position which may adversely impact the citizen. So he has to make the decision at some stage or the other whether or not he wants to defend the proceedings, and then use whatever he uses as his defense in that tribunal's proceeding in the criminal case. That is effectively removing his right to silence and presumption of innocence.
Exactly. In
And
the magistrate's
outright
court.
Yeah,
Right.
and I'm sure his lawyers probably have advised him to challenge that, because no citizen should be put in that position.
Exactly. And the police force now, I've never seen anything like this. Now you have a sergeant who basically is alleging that she was kidnapped or she was against her will taken to the commission and is being compelled, allegedly, to lie to the commission. This whole thing is a mess.
Well, you've there's so many assumptions there. You said she's kidnapped. I don't know the facts. I don't know the circumstances. So I'm not sure that I would necessarily.
Well, I'm using kidnap, but she implied that she was taken there against her will.
If she is saying that she was compelled to attend the hearing, depending on the powers vested in the commission, some commissions have the power to compel witnesses to attend. The court has the power to compel witnesses to attend.
What is compel in this context? What is the legal definition of
you're
compel?
a compellable witness. Let me start. If we go all the way back to competent or compellable witness, you are compellable in a criminal trial if you were in a position to observe, let's say, a crime, and you're refusing to attend court. You can't say to the court, I don't feel like coming, or I'm not coming. The court has the power to compel you to attend. And in the event of your refusal to attend, the court has coercive powers to bring you there. The problem with that is, having been brought there, what is the quality of
your testimony
likely to give? So you say, I don't remember, I can't remember. And that's perhaps why a lot of tribunals don't use that power, but it doesn't mean they don't have it. They definitely have the power to compel you to attend. And so if that tribunal is vested with the same powers of a judge in terms of ensuring that witnesses turn up, yes, they have the power to ensure that the person gets there. I'm not sure what will happen and what weight they would put on the testimony of a witness who clearly is reluctant, but they certainly have the power to compel you to attend.
Okay, moving on. Let us address the 300-pound gorilla in the room.
That's a pretty big gorilla, but go ahead.
That's a pretty big gorilla. Is the AFC, without discussing any internal discussions or any conditions or anything like that, that might be fluid in terms of your ongoing discussions and negotiations, is the AFC willing to enter into a coalition with one or more or all of the opposition parties and contest the election coming up as one single political unit?
Rickford, again, people miss some obvious signs. And the obvious sign is, if we have entered into an agreement to have a two-phased process leading up to the possibility that there may be a coalition, clearly we must be of the opinion and have arrived at the opinion that there could be a coalition. You don't go into that sort of agreement on the assumption that they can't be. I mean, there
could be a coalition, or the AFC would like to be there to be a coalition.
What I'm saying is, every entity and you yourself, before you go into any sort of arrangement of some level of permanence, you want to be able to ensure that there is common ground, common policies, common approach, and that we agree on the optimal process for leading to a victory. That's, you're dating somebody, you get engaged, but you just don't date them and get married. So you get engaged, and if it don't work out during the engagement, then you don't get married. But you don't wait until the marriage day to say, boy, I should have thought about this or thought about that. So I'm just saying that the fact that we've signed off on that agreement and it still is extant is where it is. I think it is clear. We've got some historic evidence that says back in 2015 that the coalition was able to win. I do want to make this clear, because I think the AFC's position has been mischaracterized. And that is this: the AFC has never said that its candidate has to be the president. What it has said is that you have to go through a process. I've said that repeatedly, and then perhaps I don't possess the integrity to say it anymore. The chairman of the party said it, that you have to go through a process. Of what we've signed up for is a two-stage process. The first part of that process is for us to examine, all the matters leading up to the possibility of whether or not there is a coalition. At the end of that process, which is the 31st of March, we see what happens. But to say that we have a person who we're insisting on, et cetera, would not be correct.
You said it best, that the historical evidence shows that a coalition could be the PPP. Now is...
But the dynamics have changed. But yes,
right.
You're correct.
Right. The dynamics have changed and the numbers have changed. We don't
the numbers have changed as well. Yeah.
We happen to think that a PP doesn't have the numbers that they had before in their base. Now, is the AFC willing to, having acknowledged that, is the AFC willing to do the groundwork, endure the negotiation, endure the long, tiring nights of negotiation to ensure that you have a credible coalition that can beat the PPP rather than independently contest these elections, where we know if every party do that, the PP would remain in power?
Well, a couple of things there. I mean, you've got some assumptions there. I'll ignore the last assumption you gave. And you've
I gotta try, man.
Yeah, you're increasing the size of the gorilla by the hundreds of pounds, not by 50 pounds. But to come back to that, the fact that we've signed off on that agreement indicates that it needs to be examined. You want me to give an outcome or an affirmative position when the process hasn't, is just starting. I'm afraid I can't do that. I don't.
You're saying you prefer a coalition, but you'll examine.
No. I'm saying let's go through the process. Let us.
Right.
We both have very competent teams who are capable of going through that process. I don't want, in my position in the Alliance for Change, to somehow seek to influence that team or in any way adversely impact their discussions.
I'm looking at the discussion happening in the chat, and someone.
How big is the gorilla?
It's a very big gorilla.
Okay, we now looking at what, a 800-pound gorilla. Okay.
Someone is asking if the AFC is willing to go into the elections alone.
Every option is available. Every single option. Any political party. I attended the launch of a political party yesterday.
That's good. I like that. That was good.
If you ask that party if it's willing to go into election alone, I can't imagine anybody forming a political party without the intention of entering elections on their own. Things can happen. They can enter into arrangements. But the AFC has been around since 2005, and I'm sure its founders intended to go into election alone and did for two of those elections.
So somebody is saying, somebody who's watching from, where was this? Irish.
Oh,
Irish.
Quarantine.
Says to tell Mr. Hughes, no, we, the opposition supporters, would like to see a coalition. There goes another gorilla.
No, it's not a gorilla at all. Elections are science, Rickford, and all election parties spend a lot of money on polling and getting the identity of what voters look like in a particular community, et cetera, et cetera. I am very happy that person from Farish has indicated what their position is, and that is noted.
Let's move on. Mr. Jagdale, last set of questions.
You want to leave that gorilla behind?
No, I don't want to leave that gorilla. I want you to drag that gorilla straight up Brick Dam into a cage. Anyway, Mr. Jagdale has been his normal self, really attacking you personally. He has sent out, or based on rumors, are paying a number of young people now to challenge numbers and create all sorts of disputes with regard to how many people they killed via the death squad, extrajudicial killings, etc. I want you to take some time and address this issue where Jagdev is trying to change history, rewrite history. And they're disputing that the people that were killed by the death squads were criminals. So Ronald Waddle was a criminal. No, he was not. He's a journalist, but they're implying that. Courtney Cumming was a political activist and a former member of the Guyana Defense Force that was honorably discharged. So no, he was not a criminal. You had Fraser, who was a police superintendent, etc. A whole lot of people. They're trying to rewrite history because they're vulnerable on this subject. They have completely, consistently refused to have an investigation by a credible international commission. What is the AFC's position with regard to these death squad killings, which I see as a genocide, and the fact that we've never had any justice, the fact that Jagdeo, who participated in decisions that led to those death squads, allegedly, is now arrogantly saying, yeah, they were all criminals. And Nigel Hughes is wrong because he's defending criminals. What is your response to Jagdeo? And what is the AFC's position with regard to these extrajudicial killings?
Sorry. Thank you. First of all, it is the most offensive allegation or statement or position to adopt, to say to the African people of Guyana that the fact that 5 people died or 500 people died as a result of state action or state execution, that it makes a difference. Not a single African Guyanese should die as a result of state action. So if there were 2 people who were executed, if it was only, or in Boston, if it was only Leon Fraser, if it was only Waddle, that would be 1 too much or 2 too much. To somehow then ask the African population, after you have insulted them as if their lives don't matter, and therefore it's a bit like the Gaza with 3 Israelis are worth 90 Palestinian prisoners, to somehow suggest to the African people that, hey, the numbers make a difference to this discussion. We only believe it's 200 people, but you're saying it's 1,200. How dare you say it is 1,200 people? Well, I'm sorry. That is so offensive. It is so fascist that to even begin to have a discussion that is premised on the basis that the number of African persons you claim executed by the state makes a difference to whether or not it was justifiable or acceptable. In 2024, are you serious? So Nigel Hughes says it's 1,200 and you're suggesting it's 200. The 200 somehow is acceptable? I'm sorry, forgive me for becoming so animated. It is just incredibly offensive. It is almost as if you're saying that the African lives in Guyana don't measure individually. It's as if they don't matter. So 200 is somehow acceptable, but 1,200 is a lie. And I'm sorry, it is unfortunate that more organizations have not stepped in and said, 1 is too much. And if the state has executed several, whether hundreds or dozens, decades, tens of hundreds, whatever, it is completely unacceptable. And we should never allow anything looking like an argument that justifies or is based on numbers to happen. So what you want to say? If they had killed 500 indigenous people, it was somehow acceptable? Or that if they only killed 10 Chinese people, it was unacceptable? That is a preposterous position to take. And that's why the Alliance for Change has said, let us not get into an argument about the numbers of African people who have been executed by the state. Let us call a credible international commission of inquiry to find out why they were executed, how they were executed, and as in that process, they will say exactly how many were executed. And if at that stage you want to say, hey, 200 and not 1,200, and therefore it was acceptable for 200 because that somehow will not lead to ethnic tension, but 1,200 will lead to ethnic tension, is a preposterous position to take. And to believe that a graduate of a university, our university in Guyana, will somehow suggest that the fact that someone has said 1,200 when it is 200 will lead to ethnic difficulties is to say that it's somehow acceptable for the African people to lose 200 people slaughtered by the state as a basis for saying it's okay. We have to really and truly call it out for what it is. That is the most offensive, racist position that one can even begin to think. Imagine if I got up and said, it is okay that 200 Indian people got killed when Mr. Jagdeo said it was 1,200. Really?
That's basically that's what they're saying.
Person should be killed.
That's Jagdeo's
position. A single Indian person should be executed. And that is the basis upon which our common humanity and our common position in Guyana should start. Not in the ethnicity, that the state is not entitled to execute a single person, none, irrespective of their ethnicity.
What do you make of the fact that President Granger is the one who said that based on the numbers he got from the state apparatus, it was 1,400, and the fact that last government did not even if it was 4. That last government did not do an investigation. The PPP is not willing to do an investigation. If the AFC goes into power in whatever format, will the AFC now commit that there will be a serious international credible investigation into
Absolutely. And I want to make this point. The fact that the coalition didn't have an investigation or commission inquiry is not a basis for saying that you cannot have an inquiry now. What are you saying? Somehow all of our hands tied because of what happened before? You remember Mr. Jagdeo in July last year said that he didn't think that cash grant made any sense? And somehow he then came back and said from 200 to 100, and then now it was going to be a one-off, and now it's multiple. Well, seriously, only Mr. Jagdeo can change his mind. The fact that the coalition government did not hold a commission of inquiry is not the basis why the Alliance for Change in 2025 cannot commit to holding it.
Or the PPP now cannot.
Or the PPP now. Well, we know the PPP does not want to hold it. The question is, if we value the lives of our citizens, then we must demonstrate it as a state. And we must do those things that are necessary. And if unpleasant as we may anticipate the results to be, we have to face it with courage. Absolutely.
What do you make of the fact that Jagdeo kind of, in a dismissive way, trades off something? So he's like, okay, if you all want to have an investigation into the death squad killings, then let us have an investigation into the massacres. As if we don't want one. I mean,
no.
Trade. Go ahead.
Let me make this very clear. Sorry to cut you. We need an investigation into the massacres. We need an investigation into Lusignan. We need an investigation into Bartica. We need an investigation into Lindo Creek. The country needs to heal.
Into Sashsaw killing?
Sashsaw killing. We need those investigations. And I'm sorry, this suggestion that somehow somebody owns one investigation and doesn't own it is ridiculous. We need all of them. What I will say on Lusignan, I wasn't in Bartica, is that the PPP attacks me for defending the people they accused. But here's the story. That was a mixed jury included several Indian people, because I suppose their argument is that Indian people got slaughtered by black people.
Right.
Completely mixed jury. They had the most intensive police investigation. But here is what happens in a normal society. If the jury have said to you that these persons are not guilty, then you need to go find the people who probably did it. In that case, there was a police officer, lead investigator, saying that a confidential witness that he had under his care and control, he said he was God to that person. In that trial, they had a witness who confessed to 32 murders who was not charged for one. The jury obviously took that into account and said, how the hell you got a man here who said he was responsible for killing 32 people and he's never been charged, and you want to bring him as a star witness? Come on. he would be better than 500 dozen canaries. He would sing. You would have a complete chorus in all of the trees. And that's precisely what the jury did. But for Mr. Jagdio's benefit, I welcome an investigation into Lusignan. I welcome an investigation, or with a supporting investigation into Bartica, into Lindo Creek, and into Mr. Sashaw's assassination. Because we should never be selective as a people in terms of the murder of our citizens. Never. We should make a resolution that how bitter the pill is, we will deal with the consequences, and we as a state will investigate so we can reach to the stage where we have a finding and we can work on the way forward from those findings.
Mr. Jagdeo has been accusing you of tampering with evidence during this same time, and he has said, and he has his minions claiming that you even defended some of the people who allegedly conducted some of the extrajudicial killings. What's your response to him?
Defended people who committed extrajudicial killings?
That's what they said, yes.
You mean,
and they said he accused you of removing...
Extrajudicial normally means state people killing citizens. Is that what he said? Because I haven't defended any people for the state who were killing people.
Well, in this case, remember, Jagdeo deputized criminals and made them state agents. So maybe that's what he's talking about. The Roger Can gang types.
Right. Okay. So two things. I don't think I've defended Roger Can, but that's irrelevant to
Or maybe he's talking about Dharmalal because you also defended Dharmalal. But
two things, Rickford. I am and was a lawyer. You walk through my door, I don't play God. I don't judge you. You didn't come to me as a priest to make confessions and then vest in me some authority to speak to you about how you're going to reform your life. That's not my role. You come to me as a lawyer. And when you come to hire me, you come to hire me to help you out of whatever difficulties you're in. Different from civil work. So in my capacity as a legal officer, I say to you, tell me what you know. I receive those instructions, and then I decide on a strategy. It's up to what the state accuses you of. And if the state doesn't accuse you of X, Y, and Z, it's not my position to arrive at any sort of judgment. And so that has been my professional career. Brian Hamilton, which is the one in which he says I removed the tape, Brian Hamilton is a relative of mine. And it is purely coincidental how I ended up going there. And I didn't remove any tape. So this is, as you give me the opportunity. Brian Hamilton is married to my brother's wife's sister. Both families are extremely close and remain close up to today. My brother was in Berbice when the information early that morning came that Brian had been shot. He said, Nigel, I cannot go to where they live. I don't want to disclose where that is. Can you go for me until I can get down from Berbice? I went to that location. And Mr. Hamilton, Brian's father, if you've ever seen a grown man in pieces, he was all over the place crying. He couldn't control himself. He says, Nigel, they have killed my son. Mr. Hamilton made his living. His family before owned the gas station, grew up in Buxton, lived nowhere else. And he wanted to find out who killed his son. You will remember in those days, you couldn't go to Buxton. The police couldn't go into Buxton. The GDF were the people who were providing law and order in Buxton. I took him to Buxton. I didn't even know where his camera is. He went to the video recording machine in the presence of police officers. Before I got there, I called Mr. Trim, who was the crime chief at the time, or the deputy crime chief. I said, Mr. Trim, Mr. Hamilton is in the car with me. We're going to Buxton. You say, you're sure you want to take that risk? I said, yes, we're going. I said, Mr. Hamilton wants to see the tape. He wants to see who killed his son. Mr. Trim's exact words to me was, we know who killed Brian. We went up, Mr. Hamilton took the tape out of the recording system. And he said, I want to get it copied. The officer there had already been called. Mr. Hamilton took that tape. Before we left the station, a GDF senior officer called me and says, Nigel, we know you got the tape. We want a copy of the tape, but we don't want the police to know that we get in a copy of the tape. I said, no problem. The tape was copied. The GDF came, collected the tape, and I personally took that tape back to CID. We went on the Friday. The sentry said that Mr. Trim was not there. I went back Saturday morning myself to carry it. And the sentry said he was not there. Knowing the police as the way I know them, I figured if I left it with the sentry and he misplaced it, you would have heard that Nigel Hughes ducked the tape. I kept it. I called Mr. Trim. I said, look, I'm here. He says, well, okay, come back Monday morning. And Monday morning, I went back and put it in his hand. The tape, the GDF had a copy of the tape within an hour of Mr. Hamilton receiving it.
Thanks for that clarification.
No,
We talking about Jack there here.
I mean, I don't want to share family business. Brian Hamilton's only child was like a daughter to me. Up to now, she lives overseas, thank God. This is like a daughter. The family is close. His wife, Brian Hamilton's wife, when they started to attack me, said, she called me up in tears. She says, Nigel, I am willing to go public and say exactly what happened. I said, no, you don't need to do that. This is not your headache. So those are the facts.
And before disclosure, Brian Hamilton was a very good friend of mine too.
The police knew who killed him because when they killed, his call name was Big Batty. When they killed him 2 weeks later, they themselves said the man that shot and killed Brian Hamilton is now dead. Everybody in the police station that morning saw who the person was that walked into the room and shot and killed Brian Hamilton. Every single one of them. All of them were scared. The supervisor that day, the GDF had to come, take him home, pack up his personal belongings, and moved him out of Buxton. So this story about Nigel Hughes taking the tape, the police knew long before Mr. Hamilton got there with me, who killed him. Everybody knew who killed him. Every single person. That tape was a red herring.
Right. Well, you know, Jack, you like to drop these red herrings. And as I was saying, Brian Hamilton was a very good friend of mine too. So we all grieve his loss. But this is Jack Dale. Of recent, he's been attacking me, you, and Terrence Hamilton.
Terrence Campbell.
Terrence Campbell. And the viciousness with which he attacks, to me, only African Guyanese. I don't see him attacking any other than Moses Nagamutu and Kemraj. But to me, he leaves his most vicious attacks for Black people. I make no apologies in saying that. And he gets away with it. And you don't get away with it with me. But he's now decided that anytime you respond to him or respond to anything from an East Indian person, that you're a racist. What's your response? Because he's calling you a racist now.
Yeah, but you know, this is standard conduct, and it's not new conduct. From where I sit, that's always been the position of that individual. That's how he behaves. That's the way he
I like that individual. Go ahead.
That's the way he communicates. He thinks that's effective communication. He speaks to his base in those terms. I don't operate on that basis. It's not the way in which I communicate with people. And so I prefer not to pay attention to it. He can continue to say what he wants to say. That's just the way he operates. We don't move in the same social circles. And that's how he operates.
Are you saying he moves in a trench and you? I'm joking. Last question, and I should have asked you this before, but last question. I happen to think, and I've been discussing this with law professors and so on here, the doctrine, the constitutional doctrine that gave rise to the provision where the chancellor and the chief justice are appointed, I think it's a bad arrangement, it politicizes it, are appointed by the president with the consent of the opposition leader. Mm-hmm. The fact that the provision has that provision with the consent of the opposition leader, don't you think the intent of that provision is to, at all times, whether you want to appoint or whether you want to appoint to act, that the doctrine is that anyone performing those duties, whether via acting appointment or actual confirmation, should get the consent of the opposition leader. I just happen to think that that's the intent of the provision.
I would prefer to have the benefit of further research on that in relation to acting. I am not sure that and this is just a first blush without giving it, more mature thought. I'm not sure that the consent applies to acting. What I will say is that in this case, they were acting when the government changed. And if you had a difficulty with them, that was the time to say, I'm sorry, I prefer to have somebody else act. But you can't wait 7 years after they appointed to suddenly say that you want somebody else. I mean, that in and of itself speaks volumes to the reason why you're doing it.
Should we change the constitution to allow those appointments to get consent from the parliament?
Well, the consent from the parliament will only with respect make sense if you don't have all the executive power vested in the president.
No, you take some away.
No, but let me put it this way. Because the way this thing is structured with a one-seat majority, you can pass any legislation other than serious constitutional changes.
No, then you put a provision of 2/3, like you haven't in Trinidad, some position
right. So, yeah.
are 2/3 majority.
Right. So the two issues there. One is who nominates, and then two, whether the National Assembly accepts and confirms. The US, in terms of interrogation of persons for positions, probably has the best system, which is that you consider the applicants. There is a public and private in-camera hearing, and you can decide. Again, the US has become so partisan, I would have said that you would expect some level of cross-board commitment to some basic standards. So you don't, when you're trying to decide who your chancellor is, you don't say everybody she used to teeth-foul at when she was 7 years old. That you don't get into that low-life kind of discussion. And it requires politicians of some level of maturity in the way it take that sort of.
Well, you can either in the amendment, in the constitutional amendment, you can either lay out the context of questioning and then give a threshold for the passage of the approval. Like you can say
I don't think you can lay out the question, and you see, unfortunately, our society,
the context, the areas, the parameters, you probably do that.
You see, our society, unfortunately, is so rudimentary and so basic. It's a hell of an admission. I've lived here my entire life, so I mean, I don't have a justification. I'm not coming from a position of somebody who hasn't lived there. I've lived through this, so I believe I can say this. And I would have hoped that there are a couple of things that we, across the political divide, would have agreed. One is that in important institutions like the judiciary and the head of the judiciary, that we have our best and brightest. And therefore, the process to lead to identify the best and brightest is clear. Two, that we agree across the board a certain level of civility in the way in which we approve this process. Because if this process becomes mired in political competition, the best and brightest who are judges or who are considering that position will not want to have themselves offered for the position, simply because it is just too indecent. The way in which people will start to attack you, they make allegations that are not correct, and the sort of microscope that goes through your life. You will have an excellent judge sitting down there, but that person is just not going to make themselves available. And so we then have to decide as a country what we have to change to make sure we get the better and best qualified people in those positions, whether judiciary or wherever else.
Last truth to God, as we say in Guyanese parlance, question. What do you say? And I'm asking this because I'm seeing some of it in the chat. What do you say to the political types in Guyana? Nigel Hughes is middle class. He's not grassroots enough. I'm not sure what that means. What's your response to that?
When people, I've heard this criticism. The best I heard is I'm aristocratic. But anyway, first of all, that is really an attack on my parents, It's not attacking me. I didn't make myself middle class. I didn't make how I was born. I didn't make where my parents were in the social standing when they're born. My father, lawyer, my mother, historian, they got together, they got married, they made me. I was lucky I came out first. What do you want me to do? You want me to apologize for having been born to those parents? So when I hear people say that, I'm not quite sure what they expect.
But how can you be middle class when you represent the poor?
No.
And
the other thing I was coming to is this.
Mm-hmm.
The station in which you're born, it is what you do in that position, to me, that counts. It is what you do with what good fortune has given you. So you become a lawyer, you've done whatever it is. I don't want to self-promote in terms of saying what I have done, but that's the basis upon which I say, if you're going to look at me politically and say that I'm middle class, I have no control where I was born. What I would ask you to do is that in your examination, as hostile and as critical as it may be, look at what it is that was done by me or anybody else that you want to say is middle class. And so if you're hoping that I will apologize for having been born middle class, that's not going to happen. I can't apologize to my parents. How am I going to do that? What I say is judge me on what happened after.
I think what people want to see is, this is just me speculating, or at least giving you my position.
I don't go and drink liquor by somebody's house on the weekend. Therefore, I ain't eligible. That's really what you want to say. That's a
little touchy subject there. But
no, I didn't say anywhere. I did not say anywhere.
Right.
Everyone says, well, I don't hang with the boys on the weekend,
No, I think what I think, and I'm seeing, I'm going off what I see in the chat. I'm going to surmise it to say that I guess they want to see a little more involvement on the ground. Like somebody just say, Nigel, why don't you go and picket? I just saw that.
I was on the picket. I picketed GCOM the same day Aubrey Norton picketed GCOM.
Right. Well, they probably want to see you more.
And say on Facebook, hey, I picketed GCOM.
Maybe that's it.
No, but long before I became a politician, all the police, not all, most of the police executions, when they execute Shaquille Grant in Agricola, in the middle of the police dragnet, I am there. So I don't run around saying, hey, I did this, because it sounds as if you're attempting to for want of a better term, show off.
Promote. No, but you know what? That's what politicians do. You have to sell yourself. So maybe what you need to do is to let the people know some of the work you're doing and let them see it more. And I think the people who ask those kind of questions would probably be satisfied.
Let me just leave you with this story and talking about way back in the day. This must have been early 90s. Death Squad and its rampage. A whole delegation from Tiger Bay turned up in my office and said, Mr. Hughes, you gotta come now. You gotta come now. They're going to kill Fishy. Fishy was a guy from Tiger Bay. They're going to kill Fishy. I said, who? Death Squad. So they say, go to Tiger Bay. These guys on bicycles get to Tiger Bay before I get there. I was driving. So when I get there, they tell me to park the car and they take me around the back. When I get there, the whole of Tiger Bay is cordoned off by the Death Squad. Black clothes, big weapons, AK-47s and stuff. They carry me through the back. In those days, they had 5-story wooden buildings, very decrepit. And they carry me, and this lady says, he upstairs here. She doesn't want to go in. I go upstairs, missing treaders, etc., etc. And literally, as I walk into this room on the 5th floor, one of the police officers, God rest his soul, Mr. Fraser, had his gun at the head of Fishy. I was about to execute him. And he saw me. And, well, of course, he didn't want to execute him in my presence. And I saved that guy's life that day. So when people say that I'm not, I assume, grounded, and that's just one example. So, of course, when we came down the step, everybody was clapping and clearing. But I have always been available and acted in circumstances like that. Wanted men. Adam Harris had me going all the way down into the back down of Wales in a cane field, 3 o'clock in the afternoon to bring out somebody that he called me. So But you don't go around broadcasting these things. Maybe people need to hear
But
about
you
it.
have to if you're in politics. People want to know what you've done. People want to know your track record. People want to know how you
People know
interact
my
with
track
ordinary
record.
people.
It's there.
So you have to tell the story. Being in politics is about telling a story of your life if you want to be a leader, right?
Yeah. It's not about me, my friend. This is not about me. This is about how we are going to share this corn amongst all the people of this country. So it's not about Nigel Hughes, and don't let them distract you to believe it is about Nigel Hughes. It's about the people.
Okay, my friend. Thank you. Thank you very much for coming on. Thank you for staying up. It's now, 11 o'clock in Guyana. This has been a very, very interesting interview. I think we'll see a couple of news items coming out of it, and you'll probably get a couple of attacks coming out of it. Nevertheless, thank you.
And I will say to you, thank you for asking me several last questions.
I said the story, go. All right, have a good night, Nigel. Thanks for joining us.
Good. Thank you. Good night.
And thanks to the audience for joining us on this Sunday edition of Conversation with Rickford Burke. I'll see you again on Tuesday. On Tuesday, in 3 days, for another edition of Conversation with Rickford Burke. Have a good night. Thanks for joining us.